In light of Canadian Thanksgiving having just ended, let me ask this question. Where does an attitude of thanksgiving to God come from? Like, where do we foster gratitude towards the Lord? Is it forced? Is it trained in? What is its source? Look with me at Psalm 100. Only 5 verses. The psalmist titled this, A Psalm of Thanksgiving, the only psalm in the book of Psalms with that title, which should cue us that this psalm in particular has something to say about giving thanks. Here it is, 5 verses only. Shout joyfully to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful singing. Know that the Lord himself is God. It is he who has made us and not we ourselves. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless his name, for the Lord is good. His loving kindness is everlasting, and his faithfulness to all generations. The psalmist, I don't know if you counted there, he gives 7 commands, 7 imperatives, 7 responses God's people ought to have toward him for who he is and what he has done. And here they are. Go through them real quickly. Again, make a joyful noise to the Lord. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord, he is God. Enter his gates with thanksgiving. Give thanks to him. And lastly, verse 4, bless his name. 7 commands. Now, it would be easy to read this psalm from beginning to end. Just take those 7 commands kind of equally and linearly and read them one by one, unpack them and be done. But remember how ancient authors, Near Eastern authors, biblical authors especially, often wrote and read. I mean, in the West here, we read again linearly, where we expect the meaning, the emphasis to be at the end of the narrative, the end of the poem, whatever it is. Middle Eastern, Near Eastern authors often wrote, and still to this day write, chiastically, where the key to understanding the words would come not at the end, but in the middle. That actually each verse kind of would have a parallel verse lower down, and they would work towards the center point where the meaning and the key to the story would be. Let me show you this real quickly with the help of a whiteboard. If you can see this, if it is focused, this is called a chiasm. Chiasm just means crossing. Think of an X where the 2 lines cross. At the middle, there is the emphasis, there is the meaning, there is the key. This is a chiasm. Just take the X minus the 2 lines there, and there is the crossing. There is the center point, which should point us towards the meaning, the emphasis, the key of the message. This is how a chiasm works. Make a joyful noise, parallels, bless his name. Serve the Lord with gladness, parallels, give thanks to him. Come in with singing, parallels, enter with thanksgiving. The beginning and the end leading to the middle, where the key is what we'll call D, know that the Lord is God. Whiteboard out. So think about this then. If that chiasm is correct, then the author of Psalm 100 is not just telling Israel to praise, to shout, to give thanks, to serve. He is telling them where that praise and thanksgiving and service comes from. And here it is in that chiasm at the center. It flows out of a knowledge of God. From knowing that the Lord, he is God, it is he who has made us. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. An intimate knowledge of that is the source of thanksgiving and devotion and praise. And as Charles Spurgeon said, knowledge is the mother of obedience and devotion. We are called to serve the Lord with glad hearts. And glad hearts come from thankful hearts. And thankful hearts come from a knowledge of God, from knowing he is our creator, our ruler, our provider. And where thankfulness is lacking in our lives, probably there is a kind of functioning natural atheism where the Lord is no longer God in our lives. Maybe we wouldn't admit it in the lives of a lot of Christians, but we begin to live lives that give evidence to the fact that he is no longer on the throne. So hear Psalm 100 then correctly. It is not just a summons to worship, but first and foremost a summons to reorient our lives, to submit again to the power and presence of God, to confess again, Lord, you are God over all creation, and you are God in my and of my life. And in that same vein, not just to know that he is God, but to know that he is a good God, to know that he is good, to know his goodness. Don't miss verse 5. Attach this to the knowing. For the Lord is good, his steadfast love endures forever, his faithfulness to all generations. This is where joy abounds, where praise and thanksgiving overflows, when we know him and we know his goodness. I mean, at that point, we won't be able to help but to shout from the mountaintops, to bless his name, to serve him with radical devotion and glad hearts. We know his goodness. And where do we know his goodness? On its fullest display, in fullest measure, but in the cross. Romans 5:8, while we're yet sinners, Christ died for us. There's no greater example of the goodness of God than that. That while we're yet sinners, Christ died for us, unworthy sinners. I mean, joy and devotion, gratitude flows out of that more than any other place. So the Apostle Paul can say, I am compelled, controlled by the love of God. To know that he is God and to know his goodness through the cross, that is what makes our hearts overflow in gratitude.